So I'm going to try to keep this video short. So basically what I did is I put a 1/4 inch spacer here. It's just a hair under. That was an imperfection, but it's not contacting inside there. Now, granted, my buddy is not really a machinist. He's a fireman. And he made this cut. When he did this, he made it a little bit off. Like the hole was too big. And when I welded it, I can only do so much. So it's slightly off. So my original thought of putting a bearing here wasn't going to work. It could have. But you see how the original steering column here, it's a sealed entity. This thing can't go in or out, but can't go in or out because of the rear bearing snap ring and you know where it's set. It's not going to go anywhere. So this thing kind of just goes for a ride, you know. So now that when you cut this thing in half, this is not the best designed steering column. So basically, it's kind of riding on this front bearing that's here. Let me. Okay, so take the switch off. Okay, so basically the actual size that you need is 200 thousandths. Okay, I made it a 1/4 because I wanted to cheat it backwards, but then I realized I kind of just left myself a little bit with a problem. I didn't use that other spacer because it's very hardened. My friend only had so much time. And anyway, I put the switch in already, but basically right now mine is back a little bit more than this. But the lock mechanism, which I don't know where the other one is right now, but it's a smaller thing that engages. So I said, oh, I have room. But then I realized I'm like 40 thousandths off. Then, you know, or yeah, about 40 thousandths off. If you go like this, you can see I'm off a little bit. It's actually a little bit on the short side. But I just test fitted everything, and it looks like these splines don't go to the very end. You know, they only go so far. They only go so far on here. So a lot of factors are involved here that made me do what I did. I'm going to put a spring or a spacer inside this hole, basically inside the other thing, to kind of keep it aligned. But because the shaft is not perfectly straight, you know, it's only going, you know, so fast when it's not like a spinning, you know, heavy-duty spinning thing. But obviously, I don't want to put pressure on the other unit. So it's better to kind of leave this kind of sloppy back here. And yeah, it may wobble here, but again, you're never going to notice the wobble. If it's off by very little. But if you can make this shaft perfect and put a bearing in here, like I was actually thinking about, this is the original shaft that I cut. I was almost thinking about cutting it here if I ever did this again, you know. If I cut it here and leave the bearing on and make a sleeve inside there, because it almost fits in here, you know. Not quite though. But I cut this off. I was going to put this inside, then put the bearing inside of that. Then you got to have it serviceable to some degree. There's no snap ring that holds that. You just bend these tabs, you know. So there's a lot going on here to sit there and try to make things perfect and try to make it as safe as possible, like I was saying with the telescoping thing. But because it's able to go in another inch, the problem that I saw with this is that this is just a, you know, this is not being held in. And the directional signal switch is just plastic kind of going over this. So if you're on the steering wheel and if you hit the brake hard and you push into the steering wheel, you're going to collapse it unless you make this like the original one that has the bearing that's in there. So it's something you got to think about. Maybe it'd be better to cut this shorter and leave the other one longer. But the other one, I think this is as long as it goes. You know, like you're going to have to add something. But if you put, you know, one on a bearing and the other on a bearing, I still wouldn't join them together. I would slide them in, let the splines find their center, and adjust the bolts accordingly, the mounting bolts here. Either way, I think that's the way to do it, you know. It doesn't need to be now. Yeah, granted, shit can get in there, so that's one reason why I'm thinking about putting something there. I bought this guy. I was test fitting it on this. It's actually too small. This is just an exhaust clamp. I'd have to make another hole here to make it tighter. But just something like that, just to prevent shit from getting inside there and just kind of make it, you know, somewhat aligned so that when you do finally bolt everything up, it's not bad, but it's just not going to be a problem in my opinion. I know I keep changing my mind and changing different things, but this is how these things go when you do it on the fly. I'm not some guy that really like has these intense planning. I just roll with it and I make corrections as I go. So you may want to put more time into it. You may not. Like I said, I was thinking about in the little hole, I could put a spring, I could put a spacer. The spring, if this is not really a strong spring, it's just one of the transmission springs I had. I'll probably just end up putting a solid spacer, but I wanted to give it some kind of cushion, but obviously it has to be strong enough that it would kick it back if you push it in, you know? You don't want to be pushing it in and then pulling it out again. I can't see myself doing that, you know, but ultimately I really didn't want to put too much weight on, you know, the the electric unit by you know, when you drive you kind of push down on it. I think that this power steering is going to be so good because the car is really not hard to spin, that, you know, hard to steer. It just, you know, if you want to do one finger turn, this is what you need, but it's just not going to, you know, have this bindage, you know. But obviously you got to be careful when you go in. I was thinking about maybe cutting a groove in here and putting some kind of you know, lock in there of some sort. You can even put a what do you call it? I was thinking of like a clamp of some sort, because it looks like this kind of goes over, you know. It does bottom out there. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. But definitely, if you have more time, I think there's other things you can do. Sorry, my phone ran out of memory. Anyway, so yeah, you can't be pushing down on this steering wheel accidentally. So like, I'm gonna have to let it, you know, hit the other shaft. But like I said, I may put a spring in there for the cushion. Even if I do put a spacer, I'll still put the spring in there just to give it a little extra, so it's pushing away and not always digging in, so that when it's at rest, it's not doing that. But at least, you know, if something happens, you can, if you hit the brake hard or whatever, it'll kind of be cushioned by this instead of trying to, you know, force it. Because the original setup, you know, uses this front shaft and it slides, you know, but it's that front shaft is solid, you know, so it makes sense, because this is actually this is off the steering wheel. This is where the bearing is. It's right up front. So being that it's up front, it, you know, it just stops, you know. It prevents it from going both ways. So ultimately, if you set this up, that's probably the way you want to go. This is just a terrible bearing, you know, so I think it'll be fine, you know, but we'll test it. The worst case scenario is that the bottom part is actually set up really well. The worst case scenario, if you have to play with this part again, it's accessible. You can get it out, it slides out, and it won't be too much of an issue. But ultimately, yeah, you don't want to have to dig into this again. But I think for the most part, I think all these videos gave you enough tools to figure out what you got to do. And so I'm going to just throw this up there, and I'm going to start investigating how to wire the module. But I really have another car I got to fix first, so I mean, I get to this till the weekend at least. So I just made this up. Basically, it's going to end up going there. I'm going to shove it inside the spline shaft. Put it on. I gather splines are tight, so it's hard to tell if that spring is really doing anything. But if anything, it adds up for the you know, the distance. And I'd rather have a spring than just a solid, you know, everything solid. But it is what it is. And basically, you gotta move it around so you get over that. And it's hitting the bushing here. So originally it was up here. I can space it even more. See, that's the body going up, but then I can move it out, you know. I can technically keep moving it. So ultimately I was trying to get it so that the shaft would not move. Now I can bolt it further down, but just for the integrity of how everything is, I think I'll space it a little bit more. But that's basically the gist of what I'm doing. Okay, you can probably hear this noise. That's actually spring loaded. Of course, it's harder to spring load when it's all the way compressed like that. I could have did more because there's more adjustment, obviously, on these. But I just didn't want it to move much, but I didn't want it to bind. Remember, my shaft is not 100% straight down there. So I'd rather there be something, giving way. Even though it's in a spline shaft, I just don't think it's going to really make that much of a difference. The customer really doesn't like this little bit, which might be alleviated by the time you get the steering wheel on. But unless you're trying to go in and out of the steering wheel, you're not going to get it. But it just doesn't leave both splines totally 100% engaged, and bottomed out. See, there's a difference between being splined and the splines going to the end and not having anywhere to go. The thing is that you need it to float, but I don't have a bearing. Like I said, ultimately it'd be better to have a bearing on this. But then that changes everything what I got going on there. I'm not even going to put a sleeve because it's literally, I could literally put tape. That's how smooth everything went, for the most part. It's really not going to be an issue. And as you can see now, if I put this guy back, let's see. And I pull that forward. Now it comes out. Of course, sorry, it's a complete mess. This is embarrassing. I can't believe I'm putting this on the internet. I'm a busy guy. I do a lot of different things, and this is not one of them. Anyway, let's see where it locks. Okay, so now we know that's the bottom. This might be the only benefit of taking it in and out, but then again, you usually have to turn the wheel a little bit to get it to lock. So now I know it's on the bottom. Ultimately, it usually doesn't lock until you turn it anyway, so I can just, now that the steering wheel is the way it is, technically, if the steering, is slightly turned that way, then I can just go like that. That's pretty much what I'm looking at, about that much. And there's no crime in playing with this. There's no set point here, and for what I'm doing, it's just fine, so all is well for the most part. Just trying to, you can't even tell with the space, but I just, like I said, I wanted to give a little bit of interference, just ever so slightly. I didn't want to do more because I didn't want to smash on the plastic or the plastic switch and all that stuff, So that's basically it. This is where I stop, and I'll catch back up later. Okay, so I took it all apart. I really don't have the thing. I kept trying to play with it. Yeah, it's got a tiny bit, but that's fine. And I turned the shaft around to put it nearer to the bottom best I could, because it's locked now. So now, turn the key off. It actually locks in the middle. That's, I think, how it's supposed to lock, And I have a feeling that over time, if anybody removed the wheel or done a wheel alignment or something got disconnected, that it usually gets further and further away as time goes on. But now it's right in the middle. I kind of like that. That way you can actually lock the steering wheel. And if your steering wheel does lock, it'll lock in the middle where there's no pressure on the wheel. You're not turning it. So, can't say the lock mechanism is the best, but to be honest, I sprayed it up. It's a lot better. It's like never been sprayed, so it's got to sit in there. And I sprayed into, if you spray into these open holes here where that piece comes out, where I have that new piece that I have machine put on, it actually drips right down into this. So that should lock the big solid thing that comes up into the hole there. So that's basically it. This guy has to go. Then I put the cable back on, and boom, locks. Not sure if the steering wheel is 100% straight, but I'm not going to take it apart again to find out. If it's off by a little bit, it's fine. It's as straight as I can get the steering wheel as far as looking at. I got to drive it and see where it is because it was aligned before. So that's it. Just putting the final touches together, and then the wiring. That's really all I got to do. Hopefully on the weekend I'll get that done.